and welcome to episode 8 in our series, The Human Condition. You will know what this episode is about because you read the title and you clicked on it. I don't know it yet because I'm coming on without a plan. I think I roundabout know or feel what I should be talking about. So I'm just gonna try to put my money where my mouth is and try to just flow and trust and not want to control what I'm doing. I just wanted to show you real quick that I'm adamantly going through this uni script that I told you about, and that I'm also going to link again in the description box to this video. It's called A Course in Consciousness by a university professor that retired. It's a 250 or so page document, and I can really vouch for it. It's great. It's got tons of material in it. It sort of covers the basic tenets of quantum physics, but then it also moves into mysticism, and it really tries not only tries to do what I'm trying to do here, but it really succeeds in doing that, and that is bridging science with mysticism or spirituality. And I know it's really tricky to use the term spirituality nowadays, which is why I sometimes use the term mysticism, because it really points to very old texts and very old traditions, going back very far in time. And I personally just find it very interesting, and also I'm really grateful that this bridging moment is happening in our time and that we can sort of witness it and be a part of it. And so I can only really suggest that you also pick up this university script and read it through. It's a great read, and you'll learn a ton of things. So if you haven't seen the first episodes of this series, I would advise you to do so, because as I keep saying in the beginning of these videos, they sort of build on each other, and it's really hard to follow if you haven't seen from the very start. So that said, let's jump right in. So I had this thought the other day. Actually, I drew a doodle for myself, and it sort of started to click for me personally and make a lot of sense. So I thought I was going to share that with you. Remember how we've talked a lot about basically our brains or seemingly having two sort of very distinct possibilities or two very distinct ways of working, and they somehow seem to be related to the dimensionalities that we've also been talking about quite a bit on this channel. So let me just try and recreate that doodle that I drew for myself. So basically we if part of our brain, let's say, is local, right, and local points to quantum theory. So local meaning being part of space-time. Then you could visualize half of our brain. I mean, of course it's not half and half, but because it's the whole thing has both properties, but just to make it more simple. So draw half a brain and sort of throw it on the plane of 4D or space-time, you know, that curved space-time sort of dimension, and we call that dimension the 4-dimensional space because of the 3 spatial dimensions, sorry, that's x, y, and z plus time. And then if you, and so in the beginning I said this is the this is the local aspect of the brain. So that aspect is able to, you know, make perceptions and create and have experiences and create memories, and so it's that half of the brain, so to speak, is prone to get stuck in sort of like a self-referential loop of perceiving. And by that I mean whenever our brains perceive time and time again, and we sort of rely on, well, perception heavily relies on memory, because whatever you learn helps you to perceive more easily whatever comes at you in the perceived future. So this sense of I-ness or me-ness occurs. But the point is, and that's sort of like the bottom line takeaway of all the videos that we've done so far, is that this is merely a concept. That's a very dramatic insight in itself. So anyway, so there's a certain line of interpretation of quantum mechanics that is called monistic idealism. I'll jot it down. And that's sort of like the philosophy that I would probably say that I'm prone to follow, right? Because it just makes a lot of sense to me. And the basic tenets is that consciousness is primary, and not matter, and that and basically the way that this particular strain of philosophy argues, it's actually tied to a person, and that is a quantum physicist named Amit Goswami, who I read a couple of books by and saw tons of videos also on YouTube. And so this is sort of like his theory also. I mean, I hope I'm recreating his thoughts in a correct way, but anyway, so basically, so this is what half our brain is doing, and the other half, or the other quality that every human being in theory has, or the other type of access every human being has is to other dimensions, and that is by its non-local aspect or quantum nature. And we, in the past, sort of stylistically drew it like this, you know, just to make a point that it's dimensions that are not inside of space-time, but sort of transcendent to the 4 dimensions that we normally move in our everyday lives. Right, so as you can see, now we have to come to terms with, well, if if what we perceive here is if part of what we perceive here is our concept of I, then the question that follows is, well, where does the I begin? Where does it stop? You know, does it, and are we ever more? And if we are ever more, what are we? So I was just thinking that, remember how at least in our European traditions, there's always been talk of humans also having a soul. And what the problem I had with the term soul was that it implies to be sort of like an encapsulated entity as well, you know, something that's separate from everything else, something that might be just living inside of our physical bodies, but still, as it's a property of that perceived I-ness, it's also perceived to be separate. And it's this separateness that I always had a problem with. Now, if I look at this theory of, and Amit Goswami calls this mind-brain, we could say maybe what we've always been talking about or referring to as the soul could now be seen as this non-local quantum nature-like aspect of our humanness, if you want to, or being human, right? So I just wanted to throw that out there for what it's worth. I mean, obviously, I don't have any answers. I don't claim to know anything more than you do. I don't claim to have any kind of access to some kind of truth that you don't have access to. So I'm just a regular person trying to figure things out. But I just thought that was really fascinating too, because, you know, it's almost like at one point we have to talk about you know, whether we need to conceive of ourselves as any limited entity, and we have to really consider, you know, if our concept of I-ness is tied to four-dimensional or to perception in 4 dimensions, then and if we sort of liken this I with being an entity, a local entity somewhere in time space that might hold, like some kind of vessel that might hold a soul, we are very prone to thinking that that soul also is an entity. And I think that's where the problem is, because my personal opinion, and I have to say that for YouTube reasons, my personal opinion is that the sort of conception of entity ends at this nexus between 4D and 5D. I personally think that in 5D and beyond, I mean, all kinds of other dimensions that there might be, and science, as we said a million times already, postulates anywhere between, or math postulates anywhere between 11 and I think 20, and that's conservatively thinking. So all these other dimensions in my opinion, do not contain any sense of entityness or I-ness anymore. You know, I think that's a phenomenon that is reserved for the four-dimensional space. And human beings, as if you look at our world today, and human beings are very much centered around this, around their separateness, their separate I-ness, their being an individual, their being a subject versus making the division between subject and other subject, or subject and object. And it's all very divisive and just very fundamentally dualistic. And I think that's where I think I said that in the past as well. I think that's where, you know, conflict on any level starts, be it in a family or in a partnership of any kind, or on a national level, or between any sort of, you know, convictions or beliefs or religions. They're all thought-based, they're all concept-based, and they're all based on this basic premise that materiality is first, is primary, that matter is primary, you know, that everything can be explained starting from matter. You know, the materialists think that that thought and that thought and mind are sort of are merely epiphenomena of our brain doing its job. So it's sort of like a consequence of having a brain. So they base everything on matter, you know. And so if you think about it, if you turn this on its head and say, no, matter is not primary, but consciousness is, then that changes the game altogether. And that's what I've been trying to explain to you with all these videos, and hopefully by supplying you with links to lectures of scientists that can explain this way better than I ever could, and philosophers and quantum physicists and all that. I think, I hope that I can interest you in this sort of paradigm change, because I think it's what we need at this juncture in our human history, if you wish, because it is also my belief that being an I-based society, or an ego-based, if you want, I mean, you can just liken that with ego. Being an ego-based society leads to self-destruction, you know, at some point. It's just not sustainable. And in order to evolve or go on, I think humanity really needs to become conscious of this multidimensional aspect of you know, that you're human beings. This multidimensionality of the human being, and I think we should start becoming aware that, you know, we can invest in this bit, we can invest in 4-dimensional stuff, but we can also invest in higher dimensional stuff, and it's probably the best. It's probably would be best if we found some kind of equilibrium between those levels of existence. And there's various means, you know, that can help you come to this point, and one of them is just inquiry. You know, scientific inquiry is actually wrapping your head around a script like that and really taking that with you when you go for walks, and really think things through, you know, but also becoming quite still, you know, and just quieting down your mind and meditating and just allowing, because if we in fact have this access, then by quieting down our minds, this self-referential process, this thought process that we seem to be involved in all the time, or most of our time, if we quiet down our mind, then this access to these other dimensions becomes more apparent. And when you develop some sort of, I would call it energetic hygiene, you know, it's almost like the same way you brush your teeth, hopefully daily, to keep your, to sort of, you know, do all these routines with your body to just keep on existing, you know, in a good way. If you did that with the more energetic part of you, which you are also, that has access or seems to have access to these other dimensions, then you would start to, on a regular basis, get insights from a place that seems to be seems to not be bound to any agenda, you know, or any individual agenda, any egoic agenda. It seems to come from a place of transcendence, but also a place of wholeness. And I know I'm starting to sound really spiritual at this point, but the way I experience it, it's also a place of unconditional love. And it's, the word love is very, very difficult, I know, because it's so misused. And what I mean by that is just, it's probably something that unfortunately none of us really experience in their lifetimes in this 4-dimensional sort of space. And I think still there's this underlying, I think, sentiment, you could call it, or maybe inner knowing. I tend to call it inner knowing. That there is such language is so limiting. If I say such a thing, then that's wrong, because it's not a thing. Such a sphere maybe of transcendence and wholeness and unconditional love. And if you go back to, we've talked about Plato's allegory of the cave before. If you go back to Plato, obviously Plato was the earliest probably idealist philosopher ever in recorded history, as far as I know. So to Plato, that would be the realm of pure forms. So this has been around ever since there's been human beings that were able to perceive, to think, to reflect and write things down and pass it on from generation to generation. So I think it's worthwhile to invest some time in this. And anyway, so that's basically the doodle that I wanted to share with you. Then I don't want to let you go without hinting something else, and that's there is such a thing as, it's actually based on Jung's psychology. It's kind of like a fun thing to do. It's a personality test. And I found it really useful, since it is based on Carl Jung's theory originally. And I took the test, I think, a couple of years ago, and turns out my personality type is called architect, or INTJ. So I'm introverted, intuitive, thinking and judging personality. And I was just really flabbergasted by how accurate the description was. And so I thought it might be fun for you to check it out. I will link this in the description box. And maybe to just, because I think one of the ways of coming from here to here is to really understand how you, as individual expression of something greater, function, because personality obviously is tied to this concept of I-ness, and it reflects, if we want to go back to the language of computers and computer programming, because I think it's a good metaphor, personality kind of reflects the programming you've been subjected to ever since you were born, and that includes your genes, the set of your genetic footprint that you were dealt upon inception, the experiences you made in your life so far, and the actions you took, the memories you created, the hardships, of course, you went through. And also we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that obviously physical brains can be wired quite differently. So there are things such as psychologically consequential conditions of the actual brain structure that lead to things like, for instance, autism, which is something I was born with, apparently. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that all of that taken together really constitutes your programming, and with that your personality. And that is why I think knowing about that and really being able to look at your personality maybe from almost like an outsider perspective, you know, reading about your personality and thinking, yeah, you know, it's an accurate description of this of this bioelectric thing that is also conscious, and I think that's like one of the first steps, you know. And of course we know this famous saying, know thyself. It's like it's a very good thing to do. So I would really advise you to get to know yourself, because if you do, if you then can develop some interest in how other people are, and if you therefore can understand them better, then you get out of this, then you might just get out of this reactionary mode, and by developing a greater understanding for both for yourself and for other people, you might find it easier to go back to find back to a very kind of centered beingness, you know, and from there taking the time to explore all these other dimensions that apparently there are. And with that, I'm going to close it for today, and I hope this has been of some interest to you, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.